This is basically 67th part of the session. So see basically how the session basically are written. Start session. So you are starting the session. If you don't write this basically, then session will not work. Set the session variable. That means you are assigning the session variable data basically. You basically allocated this. So note that basically the session start must be very first at the thing of the HTML page or tag page. It's actually HTML tag, but PHP basically is there. So you have to write down at the PHP side only basically. Get PHP session variable. How basically once basically the session is set it at the first page basically, then basically how you are going to access the session basically data to another page basically, how that is possible basically. So for that basically, see basically, just write down dollar session and variable name, that's all basically. Nothing basically you have to do. Another way to show all the session variables value for the users to the session following code basically. See, modify PHP session, that basically is like a cookies. So this basically you can say as a cookies only basically you can say. But here basically you can delete the session basically. That is the main stuff. But it's a virtual na basically. It's not creating anything to the hard disk basically. But it's writing something to the server hard disk basically. But client basically can't access this data. Like cookies basically client can access, but here basically in session basically client can't access. That's why basically the delete permission is given by the. So see basically how to destroy the session basically. Remove all the session variable and destroy the sessions basically. So basically you can say you have to write down this all this thing. It's basically unset basically. This is like one variable you are writing it, you are assigning something, and you are basically doing null basically to that variable. So this you can say as a null and destroy the session basically. This is basically you have to keep as a habit basically. These two things. Why basically they have given the destroy command? Because session basically is not accessible basically by the client side basically. So that is it. But in cookies basically the session sorry in cookies are accessible to the client side. So client basically get some information from the server basically. So it's a chaining system is there basically between client and server basically. That's why basically the delete or destroy basically functionality is not given in the cookies basically, but in session basically you can destroy and you can unset the session variables, so that basically when the newly fresh session variable gets executed, that time basically it will not create any type of problem basically in the session variables basically, so that the next time basically whenever you are going to create the session, that time to that particular page and to that particular user only basically. For example, you basically done the login, after that basically you done the logout, but you have not closed the browser basically, that time basically, but in logout basically you have written that unset and destroy, so there is no issue basically when you next time basically when you do the login, fresh session basically will get executed. Why? Because you have destroyed the session. Otherwise basically one of the person to the, if you directly close the browser, but that will create burden to the system na, basically system basically clears the session basically. So instead of system basically you basically do your stuff basically. So the destroy session basically is given here basically. So PHP filters basically. One of the person to the, what is filters? Yeah, see basically filters. validating data, determining if the data is in the proper form or not basically. So remove an illegal characters from the data basically. So that's basically you can say clearing the whatever you have the correct data, you have the wrong data. So correct data you required, so remove the wrong data basically. This also basically mostly basically we have saw basically when we were basically using the file handling basically. Filter where function basically both validates the sanitize the data. Filter functions, filter singles, variables, filter and string. This all thing basically mostly we have saw. Validate an integer. This whole thing basically we saw long before basically. Validating the IP address basically. Email address also basically we have some. URL also basically we saw. Advantage of filter basically what is that? Validate an integer within the range. These all are basically the ready-made functions basically. And that basically this whole thing basically we already saw in the previous sessions basically. Query string also basically we saw basically. But here the thing is it's filtering the stuff basically. That is the main thing basically. This you can basically run it in the coding side and then basically you can see the stuff basically. Callback function basically. One of the person told us what is basically the callback function basically. Callback function basically you can say function which passed as an argument into another function basically. But if before this basically you have to clear with the function basically what actually the function is, how to write down the function, how to call the function, how many parameters basically you can say pass to the function, how basically you can return the data from the function. This all thing if you know, then basically these all are the normal stuff basically that you know by default basically. User defined function also basically we know. These all are the user defined functions. So in next video basically we are going to see PHP and JSON. JSON basically also. Lots of people see that it's a JSON, lots of people say it's a JSON. So whatever basically it's pronounced. In next video basically.